Okay, now we're going to get into Asclepius, and the Caduceus, the ancient gods, the serpent people, the serpent beings, DNA, and what this means for us in today's world. What does this mean for us? In most schools or universities, this isn't outright teaching. If you're going to medical school and you're going to be a doctor, you may be wearing these symbols for the rest of your life, and you should have some knowledge of what they mean. I think if I was going to wear a symbol for decades, or I'd want to know what it meant, where it came from. Okay, so copyright reptilian. In Babylon, they term the Anunnaki with the term Sir, S-I-R, which means dragon or big snake. In fact, the god Enki belonged to the family line called the Brotherhood of the Snake, as his mother Nanu, concubine, was a descendant of this blood. The symbol of Enki were the two coiled snakes of the caduceus, now associated with our current medical symbol, but could hide up to 3 types of meanings. The reptilian nature of the Anunnaki, one possibility increasingly contemplated by researchers around the world, given that almost all ancient cultures speak of the god snakes, or lizard men, taken down from the stars, who credited the very creation of our species. Reptilian genetics. According to this interpretation, because the 2 coiled snakes are closely matched with the 2 helices of human DNA chain, it would be a hallmark to indicate that they created us. The caduceus would be like a copyright that comes to remember who the manufacturer of our race were. Spiritual wisdom is a symbol of caduceus, synthesis of knowledge and spiritual wisdom. Okay. As is symbolized in Hinduism, the coiled snake is Kundalini energy that man keeps latent in the sacral chakra, pending amounting to enlightenment, covering all energy centers of the 7th and final chakra, the coronal. That would be linked to nirvana. Okay, now I see what they're saying. The 7th chakra, the coronal, they're speaking about the crown chakra. In the crown chakra, of course, you're talking about the pineal gland and dimethyltryptamine, which creates super consciousness. And when they say the coronal, that would be linked to nirvana, they're speaking of super consciousness. Now, if you grew up in the 1960s, you probably heard super consciousness a lot. People with Timothy Leary, who said, tune in and tune out, gave people LSD and said, you're going to get super consciousness. You take a microdot, you take a hit of this, you're going to get super consciousness. So super consciousness should be a familiar term with the baby boomers. Now, moving on, we're going to further go down. But beyond the symbolism implicit in the serpent, are there greater signs of reptile nature of the Anunnaki? The answer is yes. Northern Iraq, at the foot of the oh yeah, I forgot. I want to add a little bit more to that. Now again, going into the pineal gland and the crown chakra, at nighttime, between 12 and 3 a.m., that is when the crown chakra is the most active. Your crown chakra is most active at that time. That's why you see the most paranormal activity between 12 and 3 a.m. People in their houses at night hear strange sounds, or they say, I seen something, I saw a shadow, or something was in my house. That's because your crown chakra is most activated at that time. So paranormal activity is closely related to the crown chakra and super consciousness and nirvana and all of this. And so we're gonna go down. But beyond the symbolism implicit in the serpent, are there greater signs of reptile nature of the Anunnaki? The answer is yes. The northern Iraq at the foot of the Zagros Mountains, archaeologists found the site of Jarmo. There were the remains of proto-Neolithic community who disappeared 2,000 years ago, like thousands of statues of Sumerian gods, including several performances of Mother Goddess of Fertility. The problem is that those figures, although showing an anthropomorphic body, their heads and faces were not human, but rather zoomorphic. Both males and females showed characteristics of lizards, slanted eyes, very large, elongated faces with sharp snouts, features, lizard, elongated skulls, conical broad shoulders, and stylized figure. And I want to show people something. People living over in Africa, the indigenous people, they purposely from birth, you create means of putting boards on their head and pressing their skulls, so their skulls will be shaped like these god figures, like these reptile creatures. They will put all sorts of they will put all sorts of marks on their faces and cut their skin so they will look more reptilian-like. So the African tribes go to great lengths to depict themselves to look more reptilian. Okay, so this isn't a joke to these people around the world. There's indigenous tribes out there who stylize themselves after appearing like a lizard person. This is taken very seriously by people around the world. One of the most intriguing figures is that of the female mother goddess holding a baby curled up against his chest. In the process of feeding, if we look at the baby, we see that his head is reptilian and his eyes are torn like her mother. So far, one might think that the symbolism of the Serpentara and the finding of these figures are more coincidences. The problem is that they have already found elongated skulls that show a level of deformation that does not correspond with humans, but with the heads of those reptilian statues. Cone heads. In the Archaeological Museum of Lima, Peru, and the National Museum of Ica are exposed a series of strange skulls that do not seem to belong to man of Neanderthal. There's a typo right there. Nor to Cro-Magnon or to Homo erectus, but much less Homo sapiens today. They are dolichophallic skulls, phallic skulls, type with unusually large eye sockets and sturdy jaw protruding chin. Now, this is what you would call the Nephilim beings. A lot of people would assume that we don't know them, we haven't been around them, but at least I haven't. That I know of course. But this is what you would call the Anunnaki, the Nephilim beings, and look at their skulls. Look how different these beings look. This gets back into the ancient mounds, the mound builders throughout the Americas. The indigenous tribes of the Americas spoke about the giants who had 6 fingers, and they would go to war and fight. The American Indians would go to war and fight against the giants, and they would subdue the giants. And I guess there was some sort of war in the Americas, and these giants came from Atlantis. When the Atlantean thing was happening, they escaped Atlantis, ended up in the Americas. So the giants were, there was tribes of giants who built gigantic stone civilizations. So you find these stone civilizations around the world, and they don't make sense. You say, why are the seats so big? Why are the steps so big? Yada yada yada. These were tribes of giants who inhabited the earth. Some of them had 6 fingers. And we find their skulls all over the earth today. We find their remains. We find their bodies. Critics say these skulls are perfectly human and that these strains are part of rituals of certain cultures to resemble the gods. They would practice cranial deformation, which date back to ancient Egypt. Okay, so some people are trying to say that these skulls were naturally deformed. With these skulls, I don't believe that. They don't look. This looks authentic to me. To that end, they use wooden boards or leather straps attached to the skull at birth. The child suffered a constant cranial compression that could actually deform the front, sides, and neck, which is impossible to modify the cranial capacity in cubic centimeters. These practices deformed bone but could not increase its volume, and the proof of this is that the skulls found that perform these deformations have nothing to do with the anomalies of skull-type cone heads. Like you see in the film Coneheads with Dan Aykroyd, right? Where it depicted extraterrestrials that came to Earth. They had these strange cone heads. Cone heads is like something you see, all over the place. Like you find, I don't know, like the Phrygian caps. If you're familiar, you see how you have the Phrygian caps. That's not exactly a cone head, but there's caps that were worn, helmets and whatnot, that sort of depicted the cone heads in the ancient world. Okay, the larger size of human skull on record measured 1980 centimeters, but some of these anomalous skulls reached a size of about 32. So substantial difference. Explanation. In addition, these skulls have 15% more width in their eye sockets, and the perfect symmetry of these lobes rule out any external mechanical pressure. The conclusion we reach is that they do not belong to any human being. Instead, they keep a close resemblance to the heads of the Anunnaki set out in previous figures. Okay. According to the Swiss researcher Nassim Haramein, an expert in physics, these skulls, which he calls cone heads, belong to the Anunnaki old and are the proof that they were not human. Authentic conical reptilian skull and big eyes of the glowing yellow. And going back to these skulls, now the modern universities have a lot of miseducation. They will actually lead students to believe these are Neanderthal beings, or these are some sort of beings who were deformed in some sort of way. They were, a more primitive species of humans. If that's true, if these are Neanderthal beings, and why are they finding these skulls and finding these creatures next to gigantic, highly evolved technological societies? Right? You're finding people who play around with bones, and they do business with bones and sticks and stuff, but yet they're living in eras of civilizations that cannot be replicated, cannot even be fathomed by modern man. We are yet to know the pyramids. We're finding pyramids under the ocean, ancient Atlantis and whatnot. But we're meant to believe that these are all Neanderthals that were at the time, and they created all this, and they did business with chicken bones. You know, you're doing business with chicken bones, but you're creating gigantic civilizations with pyramids and whatnot that can't be that doesn't make any sense. So we're looking at something very interesting here with these creatures, and we have to be practical and look at what were the stories of the civilizations of the time. What were the Sumerians talking about? Were the Sumerians talking about chicken bones and Neanderthal people? No, they were talking about extraterrestrial intervention and whatnot. So there's a lot of ignorance and miseducation going about. Forbidden history. Many of our readers may think that the story extracted from these tablets is nothing more than a set of mythologies. The official archaeology conceives these gods as disembodied beings emerged from the fertile imagination of our ancestors. But then the question arises, if this story is nothing more than a pure legend, why between 10 and 44 April 2003, during the invasion of Iraq, the U.S. Army pillaged the Museum of Baghdad Antiques? 80% house. Why 80% of the 170,000 objects in the museum were stolen? Forbidden history. Okay. Okay, so you know, with the climate over in Iraq, they're talking about the museums and the tablets. So we're looking at a reemergence in modern times of the Anunnaki creatures. You know, Iraq is modern day Sumeria. When you say the ancient Sumerians, you're speaking about modern day Iraq. Okay, not that the Anunnaki were only localized in that area, but the Anunnaki spread to southern Africa, to other regions around the world as well. Oops, I didn't mean, so that's a bunch. So this should be enough right here to give people an interpretation of history, of humans, and of these advanced civilized creatures, whatever we call them, the Anunnaki, which is an umbrella term that came to Earth. You know, I have a hard time believing, again, going back to Neanderthals and whatnot, I have a hard time believing people who did business with chicken bones were able to build pyramids and do all this other stuff. So, okay, and this article came from mysteriousEarth.net. Was the true aspect of the Anunnaki gods. Okay. And this was inspired by my research on Hermanubis. Hermanubis, again, is a mix between Hermes and Anubis, and with the Caduceus, and we're looking back into medicine, humans. Every single day, Asclepius, people are wearing these symbols with the snake and the staff and whatnot. And I spoke about previously in another video I was doing about the story of Moses' brother Aaron with the Pharaoh and the two serpents, where they threw the staff on the ground. This gets into Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, which of course the ancient Phoenicians, which was the language that the ancient Hebrews are Phoenician. The ancient Hebrews used the Phoenician language. We're talking about, you know, the book of Genesis, the gods, and whatnot. And Genesis means genetics, the genesis. So this is a fascinating subject. A lot of people are paying immense amounts of money for medical education, and they have very little knowledge of the background of the symbols that they're wearing. So it's a fascinating subject, and it's something you can learn at a local library. You know, I have a library card and I will use it. So Look at that. The winged man, the ability to come and go from the heavens. Fascinating stuff.